And there'll be keynotes every night this week, except on Friday, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday evenings. On Friday, the keynote's in the lunchtime hour. Elisabeth Burr is someone I've known now for a couple of years. I have the pleasure to get to know in the context of digital humanities. She holds the chair of French and Francophone and Italian linguistics at the Department of Romance Studies in the University of Leipzig in Germany. And I first met Elisabeth when I went to my first Digital Humanities Institute, which would have been now in 2012, I believe, after the Digital Humanities Conference in Hamburg. And it was a bit of a chance that I got to go there that summer and to show up, but it was a really fortuitous and very pleasant opportunity that she gave me to be there. She's interested as a linguist in corpus design, corpus markup, corpus-based investigations of language use. But I think more importantly for our purposes today, right, is that she's interested in overlapping questions of technology and linguistics, technology and humanities in general. And she's been a player in the Association of Digital Humanities Organizations that I mentioned earlier today for quite some time, particularly in the domains of multilingualism and multiculturalism. So she's going to be speaking today about that nexus of questions about multilingualism, about gender, and about community, particularly in the context of the school that she founded, and that was 2009, and which has been operating ever since, and which really brings together an extraordinary group of people that I've had the pleasure to interact with on 2 separate summers, and then this summer also coming back. So please join me in welcoming Elisabeth Burr.
Thank you very much, David, for the nice introduction and also for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. Beirut is my first time in Beirut, and this is a really wonderful institute you have put into place. And now I'm starting with my talk. A few words before I go into the subject itself. As a scholar of Romance languages and also of their history, I have always been confronted with and interested in multilingualism. As a scholar of Romance languages, their description and their usage, I'm also occupied with questions of gender in language usage and the construction of gendered norms and images in tools like grammars, dictionaries, and schoolbooks. And as a scholar of Romance languages, I've always been confident that even if one language is advocated to be enough, Latin or English, different languages will be spoken and will eventually supplant the dominating language, even in scientific fields. And I just recall the development of the Romance vernaculars into Romance languages of today. There's many more examples like this. And another conviction is that norms can be changed. It is exactly the history of the Romance languages which shows me that such a process depends very much on the consciousness of the people, on the tools they develop out of some interest, like glossaries, word lists, dictionaries, and grammars, and on their producing texts in these languages, and that social change can be induced by questioning paradigms. Now, for what concerns the associational level, which is concerned by this talk and which feeds into the European Summer School in Digital Humanities, Culture and Technology David mentioned, I need to talk first of all about the CLIP seminars, then about the ALLC, ATO and its Standing Committee on Multilingualism and Multiculturalism. Then I will talk about CHIME, where not only multilingualism but also gender played an important role. And the element of community in my talk is really based on personal experience. This is just the structure of my talk. I've told you about it. Let's start with the CLIP seminars. The CLIP seminars were founded by Domenico Fioramonte in 1998. The first seminar took place at Edinburgh, at the University of Edinburgh. In those days, all contributions were given in English. But the next seminar he organized in Rome, contributions were given in English, Spanish, and in Italian, and there was even simultaneous translation. The web page of this seminar is still there. The next seminar was in Alicante, at the Biblioteca Virtual Miguel de Cervantes, and I can't remember very well anymore, but I think it was Alejandro Bia who organized it, and I can't remember either anymore in which languages the papers were given. But in 2001, there was the CLIP seminars in Duisburg. This is the website. It still exists. You see that it has got multiple language versions. At this CLIP conference, there was also a policy of calling for abstracts in 2 different languages. It said, in order to respect European multilingualism, you are requested to hand in the title and abstract of your proposal in 2 of the following languages: English, French, German, Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish. And talks were given in 1 language and slides were given in another language. Now, I excuse myself a bit because all this is all a bit very European-centered. It's all about European multilingualism, but I think things can be transferred also to other regions, but that's a history of it. Then there was another CLIP seminar in Albacete. There was another one in Florence. In Florence, they published a book where the introduction is in 3 different languages, and the book unites contributions in English, Spanish, and Italian. The last CLIP seminar actually happened at King's College in London in 2006, and the policy there was submissions may be in Spanish, Italian, German, French, or English, and the other paragraph is also very important. Presentations may be given in the language of the accepted abstract. If the language is not English, we strongly recommend the use of slides in English to facilitate comprehension. If the language is English, we strongly recommend the use of slides in one of the other languages named above. So it was always both sides. Both sides had to do slides in another language. So summing up a little bit, over the years, the CLIP seminars have thus installed a policy of multilingualism, have proven that it was possible to give papers in different languages, and have experimented with ways to respect linguistic diversity and to obtain linguistic inclusivity at the same time. With this background in mind, and above all with a very positive experience of the CLIP seminars in Leipzig, I started to lobby for multilingualism and multiculturalism in the Association for Literary and Linguistic Computing, which the abbreviation is ALLC. It's now called the European Association of Digital Humanities. In 2002, the Association for Literary and Linguistic Computing and the Association for Computers in the Humanities, which holds still the same name today, established the ATO work group, which was charged with examining possibilities for closer collaboration between the 2 organizations and within the field of digital humanities more widely. Perhaps you have to know that the Association for Literary and Linguistic Computing was a so-called Europe-based association, whereas Association for Computers in the Humanities was a US-based association. And the work group, which was established in 2002, paved the way for the foundation of the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organizations. That is a big, super umbrella structure we have now. Members of this group were representatives from the 2 associations and from the TI, and there were some additional invited members. And I was charged with the production of a detailed position paper on internationalism and multilinguality, it was called, which in May 2003 became an integral part of the executive summary of recommendations, which were then presented at the 2003 conference at the University of Georgia in Athens. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about this position paper. The position paper said that people feel very strongly about their languages and cultures, that they wish to express themselves in their own language, and that there is a direct link between language, culture and identity has become evident not only in the process of unification Europe finds itself in, but also by the terrible events which recently happened in some of the European countries. Those were the days of the Yugoslavian wars. Monolingualism is thus no solution, not only for Europe in particular, but for the world in general. Instead, it would endanger the cultural ecosystems and annihilate every notion of singular identity. And there was a Mainz resolution of the UNESCO which stated, people have a right to access digital information and knowledge in their own language. Now, what that meant for the atoll, or for this work group, it says in this position paper, as the key objectives of the atoll are to create an associational framework that supports the promotion of the scholarly application of advanced technologies in humanities research and teaching as effectively as possible across a wide range of countries and possibly worldwide. There is an imperative for atoll to take seriously the multilingual and multicultural issue and to develop adequate policies and frameworks. And the same goes for the already existing regional chapters, as they do not operate in monolingual or in monocultural settings either. So that means even the European Association didn't operate in monolingual or monocultural settings, nor the American neither. Furthermore, successful handling of multilingualism is crucial to our credibility as an international scholarly organization, and also to our ability to attract the membership, not just in numbers, but in breadth of constituency that the organization will need in order to thrive. Another sort of point, which in those days was very important, and looking back at it, perhaps one has to think differently about it, but anyway, in those days it seemed there might be a substantial danger that separate organizations are being created which respect the linguistic and cultural situation of individual regions, for example the Mediterranean, better than the ALC has been able to do up to now, and allow people from this region to communicate their ideas and access information in their own languages. This has to be avoided at all costs, as it would mean a counterproductive dispersion of energies and means. Now, we have got all these organizations nowadays, and I'm coming back to this point, and perhaps it wasn't such a bad thing, actually, to create them. It was requested that a fundamental attitude shift with respect to languages and cultures should be undertaken by our scientific communities, and ATO and its envisaged regional chapters like AL or CACH and the new ones to be created in the future have to take a multilingual, multicultural setting in which they operate and from which they draw their membership into account. This means that ATO, as a potential world organization, will have to make its information available in as many major languages as possible. See, for example, Greenpeace. Greenpeace in those days had already a webpage, I don't know with how many language versions, so it was possible. While the individual regional chapters can limit their coverage to the languages of the region they focus on. Recommendations were expressed in this paper. The recommendations were to have multilingual websites of ATO and the regional chapters, have a journal in print, which fosters publication of papers in different languages, and all papers, including papers in English, should have been preceded by an abstract in another language. Authors should decide which language the abstract should appear in, and authors should be encouraged to write the abstract themselves in a different language, because the idea was also most people are anyway multilingual, and if not, they've got colleagues and they can help them. And so we can all do that. The same recommendation was there for the electronic journal and for the conferences. Conferences were supposed to have multilingual conference sites, multilingual call for papers, to ask for abstracts in at least 2 languages. One of the languages has to be among the conference languages, and both versions of the abstract are to be published on the conference website. You can see how this experience of CLIP actually fed into this, because we already knew that it could be possible. And another important point, build up a list of reviewers who can review papers in languages other than English. If we don't have reviewers who can read other languages, then we cannot have papers in other languages. The impact of the position paper and the recommendations can be seen in 2003, when the theme of the ALC-ACH 2004 conference, which was to take place at University of Göteborg, was decided. The theme was computing in multilingual, multicultural heritage. The call for proposals was published in 8 languages: English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, Swedish, Hungarian, and Catalan. And in 2004, at the University of Victoria, the call for proposal was published in 7 languages: Catalan, English, French, German, Spanish, Swedish, Hungarian. Italian is missing because nobody had time to do the translation. At the University of Victoria, it's a very important conference actually, also the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organizations was officially founded, and ATO set up the Standing Committee of Multilingualism and Multiculturalism, and I was nominated its first chair. In 2006, the case was a bit special. It was the first conference of ATO. It was happening in Paris, but the call for proposals was in English and French only. And it said submissions may be in English, French, German, Spanish or Italian, but submissions in a language other than English or French are expected to provide an English summary. So just an English summary, not a French summary. I mean, the French sometimes can be a bit particular. Let's call it like this. Now, what did this standing committee, or what does the Committee on Multilingualism and Multiculturalism do? It always called for volunteers to translate the call for proposals to digital humanities conferences. So every year it was looking for members of the community who would be prepared to do this job. In order to, now that goes back to the first years, in order to facilitate translation and future revisions, the English version of the call was being split up into paragraphs, and these paragraphs were incorporated into an Excel spreadsheet. The spreadsheet should be used for the translation into other languages. That was only a way of doing it to make it easier for the people, but it was really tedious. And nobody was prepared to develop a tool which could actually help to do the job. The problem was in those days that the call changed every year, and every year there were new paragraphs and paragraphs were changed. And so the work was quite hard. So the next thing the MLLC did, among other things, it lobbied for quite some time for the stabilization of most parts of the call. And in August 2012, when the call for DH 2013 at the University of Nebraska was being prepared, the proposal of the MLMC for the stabilization of the call was finally taken into account. And from there on, only small parts and only very few paragraphs, for example, the paragraph about the local organizers, had to be translated every year afresh. Why the call for proposals? The MLLC published a statement on the importance of the call for proposals, and it said the MLLC sees the call for proposals to the ATO conferences as the most prominent medium to make clear that ATO acknowledges the multilingual nature of its community. It strives to make sure through the contribution of voluntary translators, that the call addresses the Atto community in as many of the languages spoken as mother tongues inside the community as possible. And it sees the activity of bringing together and coordinating such volunteers and of making sure that their contribution to the cultural and linguistic inclusiveness of Atto is being valued as a crucial way to involve new and especially young people in Atto and to make them part of the larger community. In 2013, that was really great. The call for proposals for the DH 2014 conference in Lausanne was available in 23 languages, and I read them out to you. Arabic, Bulgarian, Catalan, Chinese, English, French, Romanian, German, Greek, Hebrew, Hungarian, Italian, Japanese, Norwegian, Persian, Polish, Portuguese, Romansh, Silvan, Russian, Serbian, Spanish, Turkish, Welsh. Obviously there are many, many languages missing, but there are also quite a few languages publicly available. Now, summing up a bit, the idea behind this activity was that people care about their languages. And see, I think Wikipedia is a very good example, because people just write articles in their own language about all sorts of things. Yeah? And you find, for some pages, I don't know, you find language versions in so many languages, even in dialects and things like that. And they do not get paid for it, they do not get personal gratification perhaps, but not a public gratification. So I think that's a very good example that people actually do many things because they care about them. The idea was also that the best way to foster multilinguality would be a playful way, and I would like to use perhaps now the word gamification, because it was a bit like a game, and also running up to more and more languages was a bit like a game. The other idea was that no language should be excluded and no rules should be established. A bit anarchic, but anyway. On the whole, the activities of the MLRC with respect to multilingual versions of the call for proposals, reviewers who were sensitive to linguistic and cultural diversity in the community and diversity of academic cultures and scholarly productions, and critical to the reviewing process, I think it had many effects actually. In a way, it also paved the way for GoDH, and I think you heard something about GoDH already, and for discussions about diversity and inclusivity. Perhaps just one more word about what I say about diversity of academic cultures and scholarly productions, because when you looked at the submissions of the proposals, one could notice that, for example, in Japan, proposals for a conference are done in a completely different way than proposals in the US, for example. And the danger was always that because they are so different, they would not be accepted. And this is not the case only for Japan, because all countries have got their own academic traditions, and they have got their own traditions of writing scholarly papers. So I think you have to be very sensitive towards these sort of things. A word on the importance of the language matter, and that means also coming back to the point where I said, where I was talking about the danger, but now looking back it looks a bit different. I think the importance of language can be seen also by the foundation of language region-based association. It's very interesting what's happening at the moment. I mean, in Germany, for example, we did not found a German association of Germany, but it's it's called Digital Humanities in German-speaking regions. So it's international in a way by itself, but the common basis is the German language. So that's different than a national organization. We noticed when we had our first conference that we actually were not really able to talk so well about digital humanities in German, because most of us, many of us, have learned and discussed about digital humanities in international and Anglophone settings. And I must admit, so many times when I should talk about digital humanities, my head starts to work in English still today. So it can be seen already that our conferences in German, we had the second conference this year, will foster the development of a German terminology and a scientific way of talking and writing about digital humanities. And it will also help the development of a way of talking about digital humanities with our families and friends. And now I like to quote David. I don't know whether I got the quote right, but you said more or less that at the Leipzig summer school when you introduced the presentation in Arabic by Tracy, I think it was. He said something like this: students need to be able to talk to their friends and family, grandparents included, about what they do. And I think the same goes for us all. And I will never forget that. I think that was such a good point. And then Tracy did her presentation in Arabic, and everybody really listened in absolute concentration. I thought that was wonderful. Okay, now let me get on to gender. Gender, you have seen the page of CLIP 2001 before, and it says on this page that the most important result of CLIP was CHIME, and CHIME was a European network of excellence which was called Computing and Humanities in Multilingual Europe. The proposal was handed in the 6th framework work program of the European Commission, Information Society Technologies. It never got funded. We handed it in twice. Still, the work which was done, I think, was very important. This is the old web page. It cannot be found on the web anymore, but I used it in a few publications, so I can actually have access to it. In this proposal, we also analyzed the situation with respect to gender, and we found that the gender gap with respect to users of the internet seems to be narrowing rapidly. But there is still a big and sometimes even growing divide between the genders in the areas of ICT-related research, education, training, and SMEs. These are small enterprises, small and middle enterprises. In most European countries, women are vastly underrepresented in scientific and technological research, are very reluctant to take university degrees in scientific and technological disciplines or to train for jobs in the ICT domains. Furthermore, considerably less women start or lead such industries. When studying the gender divide and the attitudes which lead to it, most attention has been devoted to the scientific, technological, and technical domains. The humanities, where women are traditionally in the majority, have been hardly ever the center of interest. Although in many European countries, precisely in this domain, the shrinkage in the percentage of women from one qualification or career level to another is particularly strong. Leadership positions are mostly occupied by men, and diffidence towards ICTs is very common. Another domain which has not been given much consideration, although the percentage of women there is particularly high, is the teaching and learning of languages, not only in universities, but even more so in schools and professional training. And also in this domain there are all these stereotypical attitudes, and women are found to lack confidence with respect to the use of ICT. ICT means information and communication technology, the whole field, and to leave everything to do with technology to their male colleagues or male students. We saw that gender issues are relevant also with respect to e-content in general, and the digitalization of cultural heritage in particular, and that it is crucial to overcome the marginalization of women caused by the traditional gender disparities in the canon, and to promote the inclusion of women's cultural, social, and scientific history and their contribution to technological and economical developments, to science, culture, literature, art, and so on, in the digitalization effort being put in place in many European countries. And another point was that women's needs and expectations with respect to ICTs, their design and implementation have to be taken into account. Chime wanted to overcome not only linguistic and cultural obstacles by the promotion of multilingualism, but also to overcome the gulf between male, hard science and technology domains and female, soft humanities domains via its multidisciplinary composition. Chime wanted to create an innovative space with excellent potentials for interdisciplinary and integrative research and for a new type of collaboration and exchange between the genders. And Chime wanted to disseminate this new role model in all possible ways. Now the digital humanities come in. In those days we thought, and I still think it, the integration of the humanities and ICTs is not only to be seen as a way to meet the high demand for professionals trained in the confluence between the humanities disciplines and the ICT, foreseen in a vast sector of the so-called knowledge economy, but it would seem to be also the means to overcome the division between the so-called soft female and hard male disciplines. Humanities computing would, in fact, link the female students' interest in languages, literature and cultures with applied computing, giving women the chance to become confident with ICT, to overcome their diffidence towards ICTs, to discover the interest for science and technology. Thus, the development of ICT-oriented, and it's really funny that we were talking about more or less the same things in those days that we are still talking about today. So we said the development of ICT-oriented university degrees, postgraduate courses and doctorates in the humanities, or study groups and workshops will be one of the best ways to encourage and promote women's participation in research. Humanities computing and digital humanities are already leading to new research questions and methodologies which have the potentiality of addressing women's needs and interests better than the traditional gulf between the humanities and science and technology. Chime wanted to undertake a few affirmative actions, and I was amazed myself when I read through them again. We wanted to organize humanities computing workshops at a local, regional and national level, favoring above all the participation of women, organize a Women's Day with integrated knowledge fair, which takes place locally and virtually at the same time, and where, among others, the results of the projects will be presented to a European community in a multilingual way. And we wanted to institutionalize a European e-humanities summer school for university teachers, young researchers and graduate students. And we wanted to create European degrees on all levels of education in e-humanities and a consortium of European universities to teach these courses and to undertake research in humanities, computing and e-humanities. All these terms, e-humanities, I mean, in those days they just came about, and today we still talk about e-humanities. I'm more for digital humanities and humanities computing as some the methods and the activities we do. Now, this is only to say that since the analysis we did in those days, and if you look at the reports which have been published afterwards, and it's also very interesting to look at the Global Gender Gap report, which is published every year, that is no considerable change as far as I came to see to the situation in 2003. Okay, this was the gender element. Now, the community, as I said, the community element is much more based on my personal experience and the conviction that it is important to understand oneself as part of a community, above all in innovative disciplines or disciplines which are still trying to establish themselves, and where the individuals interested in it or who are already doing it are really dispersed across the whole world. As I said, this conviction that one has to belong to a community, or that it's important to do so, is based on my own experience. Now, people who have been at the summer school will hear something I normally tell at the beginning of the summer school, but I try to put it a bit differently in this talk. Anyway, my experience in the 80s was that when I sort of had come to the conviction that knowledge about real language produced by real people in real situations should be at the basis of our understanding of how languages work and not theoretical models, and that language usage could only be analyzed systematically by using computers. In Germany there was hardly anybody who thought like that, and that meant that I just could not talk to anybody, more or less. So, in those days, most people occupied themselves with computers in... most people who occupied themselves with computers knew how to write programs, they were programmers, or set out to learn it, and then applied these programs to the analysis of some phenomenon in an idiosyncratic way. And one day I came across the ALLC, the Association of Literary and Linguistic Computing, and it held its conference in Siegen in Germany, so that was not so far away. And I actually went to this conference, and this conference really changed everything for me. I was introduced to the Oxford Concordance program. Nobody probably knows about that any longer. You still do? Yes. The OCP helped me to take a decision about the markup to be applied to my corpus of Italian newspapers, because in those days that was really difficult to know what to do with the corpus and how to analyze it. And the markup depended very, very much on the software you were going to use. I tried so many different types of software, and they cost a lot of money. I got to know people whom I could ask questions without running the danger of losing my face, because my questions were not like the ones of specialists, and I started to see myself as part of a community. I was not laughed at because I wanted to construct an electronic corpus of Italian newspaper language. Even newspaper language was a funny thing to do, and analyze it applying computational methods. And another sort of fact was, it wasn't seen to be strange or unfitting that a woman was interested in using computers and found technical stuff attractive. It also introduced me to the CAF conferences. I don't know, does anybody remember the CAF conferences? They had been running in Britain for some time, and I started to visit them regularly, and I think the topics of these conferences are quite interesting. Computers and teaching in the humanities, teaching with computers, experiences and opportunities, courseware in action, computers and the changing curriculums. So it was all about teaching, using computers in the humanities, teaching with computers in the humanities. I also went to many other conferences. I went to the ALLC ACH conferences. I actually went for the first time to the US. That was in 2001 when the conference was in New York. I'd never been there before. And to other conferences in the field. And I can only say that by myself, without all these conferences and the community I found there, I would never have become the digital humanist I'm now. Now to the European Summer School, where all this actually feeds in. In 2005, I got my chair, the chair David named already, at Leipzig University. The university was preparing for its 600th anniversary to be celebrated in 2009. And I thought that a university which defines its mission as a tradition of crossing boundaries would be the right place to realize finally the old idea of a summer school in digital humanities, which would take into account multilingualism, gender questions and community building. The model, there was a model, the model was obviously the Digital Humanities Summer Institute at the University of Victoria. And in 2009, the first European Summer School in Digital Humanities took place. And here is the web page. It's all it can also be found on the leaflet, so I'm not going into it. I just want to say something about the mission. The mission was and still is to bring together students, young scholars, academics from the arts and humanities, library sciences, social sciences, engineering and computer sciences as equal partners to an interdisciplinary exchange of knowledge and experience in a multilingual and multicultural context, to create the conditions for future project-based cooperations and network building across the borders of disciplines, countries and cultures, to provide a stimulating environment for discussing, learning and advancing knowledge and skills in the methods and technologies which play a central role in humanities computing and determine more and more the work done in the arts and humanities, in libraries, archives and museums and similar fields. To integrate these activities into the broader context of the digital humanities, where questions about the consequences and implications of the application of computational methods and tools to cultural artifacts of all kinds are asked. David, how much time do I have?
We started a little bit on the late side, so 10 minutes or something.
Okay, that should be all right. To provide insight into the complexity of humanistic data and the challenges the humanities present for computer science and engineering in their further development. And to confront also the gender gap. Not by following taken by so many measures which focus on the STEM disciplines, that's STEM stands for mathematics and sciences and all these sort of things, the hard sciences. The STEM disciplines and try to convince women to leave the humanities and to take up studies in computer science or engineering. That's actually happening in Germany all the time. Women should not do humanities. But by relying on the challenges that the humanities with their complex data and their wealth of women represent for computer science and engineering and their further development, relying also on the overcoming of the borders between hard and soft sciences and on the integration of humanities, computer science and engineering. Now the signboard, I don't know how you call it, it's Leonardo's drawings of machines, because I think they symbolize a holistic and boundaries crossing approach of the digital humanities and the school alike. And on his drawings you always find text, you find so many other things, so it's a really nice integration of all sorts of fields. It wants to offer humanities students and scholars the possibility to gain practical knowledge of the application of computational methods to the digitization, description, analysis and production of humanities contents and artifacts, to discuss related theoretical questions, and to forge new perspectives on the study and preservation of languages, cultures and cultural memory, and the translation and exchange between cultures. And it wants to offer something also to the students and scholars of computer science and engineering, and above all the opportunity to acquire insight into the nature of humanities data, to get to know the areas in the arts and humanities in which computational methods are employed, to learn to recognize the difference, and I think that's very important, the difference of the humanities approach to these methods, because they're not the same as when the computer scientists use them, and to confront themselves with the challenges that work with extremely complex data presents for soft and hardware solutions. Community building is one important element of the school, because the school is not just about the acquisition of knowledge, skills, and so on, but also about the creation of networks across disciplines, languages, cultures, countries and continents. And we try to do that by communal coffee breaks. We know that from here as well. Communal coffee breaks are always a good way to get to know each other. Communal lunches in the refectory, a cultural program composed of communal visits of museums, archives, libraries, excursions, sometimes boat trips, sportive activities and the like, and communal dinners in different parts of Leipzig. So that could also be a problem, but people at the school normally are involved all day long and can hardly escape. So some do, but most don't in the end. There is also some sort of language policy because the school wants to cross borders as well in this respect, and it wants to go against the tendencies of a more and more monolingual culture of science by putting great esteem and respect for European multilingualism in the variety of European knowledge cultures. When I prepared the talk, I thought I should actually change that now and shouldn't just put Europe, but just multilingualism and knowledge cultures. I think that's enough. But obviously, a working language needs to be adopted, and English is, we shouldn't be too optimistic about it. We've got a lot of experiences now. English is somehow the language everybody would seem to know, not very well many times, but still one can communicate. So the sort of working language is supposed to be English, but in the classes, depending on what the people know, all sorts of languages can be used. There is also a request that presenters of projects do bilingual presentations and posters. We haven't really achieved that yet. But the aim is to ensure that not only the functions of the lingua franca as a means of overarching communication, but also the functions of the mother tongue as a culturally bound means for the expression of thoughts, ideas and concepts can be realized. And in the case of participants whose mother tongue is identical with the lingua franca, this request aims at a sensibilization for the differences of knowledge cultures and the enormous achievement which the communication of contents in a foreign language represents. There's also multilingual websites. Now the multilinguality of the website is not very much rule governed. It comes about by what we manage to put into other languages, but also, and very much so, by the languages workshop leaders and lecturers are prepared to contribute, because workshop descriptions are requested in 2 languages at least. One language has to be English, but any other languages can be handed in as well. And everybody does it. Presentations of workshop leaders and lecturers are requested in 2 languages also. And the future perspective would be to open up the Drupal site. That's also why we built a Drupal site in such a way that language versions of all the texts in the site can be contributed and updated by the community. I'm just running through a little bit the development of the school. I mean, it changed over the years, the structure changed, the duration changed, workshops changed obviously from year to year. It depends also on the development of the field, but at the beginning it was 5 days. We had funding from Volkswagen Foundation. The 2010 it was 5 days. I also put down the countries from where the people came, so 16 different countries, 17 different countries. In 2012, I mean that was the year David was there, that's why Lebanon appears in red. We had 9 days. And 23 different countries in 2013, 11 days, and 16 different countries. So in 2014, there was a collaboration between Clarende, Digital Humanities Summer Institute, Humboldt Chair of Digital Humanities, and we had 24 different countries, and 61 participants. That was also the year when we changed the course structure a bit. Now the courses are structured into equal blocks so that people can actually also have take 2 different workshops or 1 workshop all through the 2 weeks. So over the years, 352 people have taken part in the summer school in various capacities, and altogether they came from 39 countries of the whole world. Now 2015 is being planned, application phase has been opened, there's a great variety of workshops. We might change the structure a little bit again, because on the basis of the evaluation questionnaire of last year. I say perhaps a word or two about credit points because I think it was approached in the opening. We sort of calculate credit points on the basis of what we think the workload of the school is. We cannot accredit them, but it's up to the universities where the students come from to accredit it, to recognize the credit points. And we invite them to recognize the 6 points we think are adequate for the school. We could also debate perhaps it's worth more, I don't know. It's very intensive anyway. We belong to the training network. I mean, I think Ray probably will say a bit more about that, so I don't have to go into that. And also about the graduate certificate in digital humanities, Ray will probably say something about that. Now, instead of a conclusion, I just there's just some quotes from participants which should conclude my talk. And sometimes they're very sort of controversial, but that is quite normal. A bit more teaching hours would be good, but more time for hands-on would be even more important to apply new things learned to one's own data with possibility to ask for help. I think the amount of hours should be retained. More hours would perhaps be too tiring. I considered it a great opportunity to present the workshop results to the other participants, respectively learn of what other participants did in the workshop. This feature was very useful and should, in my opinion, be retained. I think the workshop presentation results could be much shortened or perhaps turned into a poster presentation. I was in 2 workshops and I like getting to know different course members, but both workshops were so interesting I'd have liked to get further into the topics. Plus, it was not easy to join a 2-week workshop in the second week, obviously. In my opinion, the structure should be retained for future summer schools. It offered good opportunities to meet people with similar academic interests in the workshops. I especially like the project presentations, a lot of info on interesting projects in little time. The general presentations helped a lot to broaden my perspective on digital humanities. I got a lot of insights about the different areas of application for computational methods in the arts and humanities, which I did not know of before. For theoretical discussion, I found the joint lectures very illuminating. I think now that's about the community. I think the communal dinners and coffee breaks offered a very good opportunity to foster communication and exchange and to get to know people from other disciplines in the area of digital humanities. I think the social aspect of the summer school is of great importance and should not be changed. I enjoyed the variety of restaurants that you showed us in Leipzig. That way we got around more, because the idea is also to go to different places in Leipzig, because there's not much time of doing sightseeing. I very much like the idea of the free afternoon in the park, where you offered options for sport activities. That was a lot of fun and helped to get to know each other better. This was one of my favorite aspects of the summer school. I really enjoyed being able to build community while also learning new things. And the last quote, the atmosphere at the summer school was different from any other DH training network school I have attended, in that a far greater diversity of languages and nationalities appear to be represented and recognized. There is no question that this fact alone made my experience in Leipzig unique from any DH summer school I have attended, and that my own scholarship has benefited enormously in terms of new collaborators, and I think that's very important. New perspectives on how disciplinary practices are given different inflections in different geographical regions. And I think I'll close with that remark. Thank you very much.
I'm going to turn the light. I'm sure that Elisabeth is willing to answer some questions, have a conversation about the topic.
Yes?
Thank you for the talk, really. It was very, very interesting. There was a comment you made about, I think, one of our students, Tracy and Haj, who spoke in Lebanese Arabic, and everybody was paying attention to her. And I just somehow went off on a tangent, but I remembered seeing something on The Voice not a while ago, and a Lebanese singer sang in Arabic, and the jury, as far as I know, not one of them knows Arabic. And they were all listening very, very attentively, and actually they were mouthing the words, they were trying to follow. And all the time I was saying, what are they even trying to do? Because they were moving their lips. And they really enjoyed the song. What did they enjoy? I mean, what about the words? I mean, what can someone, when you don't speak the language, and you're listening to a talk, to a song, to a presentation, you don't know the language. So what does somebody get out of it?
I mean, there were obviously some words in there, like digital humanities, which people could actually understand. And I think the experiment wasn't really to present the project in Arabic, so that we got something about the project, because afterwards the project was presented in English.
Okay.
But it was to have it the sort of multilingual way, and to illustrate also what David had said before, that we need a language to be able to talk about digital humanities, and it cannot just be English. Yeah? And I think this whole setup and the example he then was, and Tracy as well, were prepared to present, I think that was a wonderful illustration of the fact, yeah, that one can talk about digital humanities in Arabic in this case. Yeah.
Okay.
And there are so many people who say, oh no, why should I talk in Finnish or something like that about digital humanities? Nobody will understand me. Yeah, not the whole world, but we are talking to other people as well. We're talking to friends, to family, and we're talking about what we are doing. And we want to communicate.
It's creating a platform, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was an example, and it was an experiment. So, and I thought it's very good to teach people that there are different languages, and get them also to listen to them. Yeah. I think that's very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a really fascinating talk. And,
Do you want
I
to
guess-
ask a question in German first?
It's a good question actually, whether I should do that. Andererseits passiert dann genau das, was jetzt passiert, nämlich dass nur mal beide wahrscheinlich uns verstehen und dann kann es übrig bleiben. But basically that is what my comment is about. That what you've shown us is one thing that is really important when it comes to digital humanities. I'm happy that most digital humanities fans are actually quite aware of this fact, that people come from the margins of established scholarship, and thus they are used to this sort of awkward position where they are not readily accepted, and thus that they have to listen attentively, which on the other hand pertains to humanities at large. And I think this is important, not just if we talk about it at the AUB, but for instance in German academic environments, where we have this huge convergence towards a monolingual environment, where people then judge on their proficiency of English and not the content of their talk, which is really bad, because there is a certain bias towards American schools, American PhDs, not so much England, but to a large extent American. And I think this is important to emphasize and say, no, we should actually conduct not just research on other languages, but in other languages than English, and adopt all these tools that were developed by mostly engineers and scientists and the other to other languages, and have, Arabic programming languages.
And for English as well.
Yeah. Of course, but that might actually follow entirely different logics than an English programming language. Even though it might not be most useful, like when we come from the background that everything works in English, but I think that is really important, and that is something that has to be emphasized over and over and over again. So thank you very much.
Thank you as well for the
Comment.
remark. No, I think it's the question is the perspective. I mean, it's not about doing away with English, but it's doing away with English only. And where we need a common language, where we try and communicate across languages and we don't have other languages. It can be English, French, it can be other languages. It doesn't have to be, it's not just English a world language. but not undervalue the other languages and identities, and also knowledge and all these sort of things is really bound up with these languages. Cultures are bound up with these languages. And if we don't use them, and that's why also I think sometimes being a Roman scholar is very, very useful, because when you look at the development, a language becomes a language in full terms when it is also used in scientific domains, and then the media and things like that. If a language is not used in the scientific domain anymore, no science written in whatever language, then the language will be reduced to a dialect, more or less, or a peripheral communication medium. Yeah? And we should be very conscious about that, that it's not just about I don't know, about being present all over the world, but it's also important to foster our own cultures and cultural knowledge and cultural heritage and everything which is bound up with the languages.
Ray?
Yeah, kind of picking up on that too. You know, Elisabeth, I really enjoyed your talk too, and it was nice to be reminded of well, number one, a shared history, because we were working on these things together. But number two, I was support to your lead on a lot of these things. And I wanted to ask you, given that you've given us not only a retrospective, but I think a really positive sense of evolution over time, what is your take on some of the more recent movements in those directions? You referenced GoDH a few times too, Alex is here. GoDH, a very positive thing that no one could have imagined back when you had your first summer school, but is clearly, I think, one of the types of things that have come out of the environment that you've led for so long. I was wondering if you'd be able to talk about a couple more of those things that you see now having come out of the very fertile soil, or the very strong foundation laid by the things that you referenced.
I thought that Alex was already, you were talking about GoDH already?
It was a lightning talk.
It was a,
That's the
going
point,
to
that's
talk
right.
more about it. No, because Alex is much more involved in GoDH. I mean, as far as I understand it, it's a bit, perhaps a little bit more in the direction of this, just taking people in and basing things on the community, and it's perhaps also a little bit this sort of anarchic way and gameful, gamification way of going on about multilingualism and multiculturalism. And I like the activities being put up, for example, at the Lausanne conference. They were called the Whisperer In or something like that.
The whispering program,
Yeah, the whispering program. So, I mean, I think all this opening up and all this creativity is really great. And I think it's really important to get the community and value the community and what the community does. And if they do something in a certain language and in another language, that's wonderful. And I think also the documents about all the inclusivity discussions and the policies which have been developed, I see them in very, very positive terms. And I think it's just opening up and becoming more sensitive and conscious of the complexity of things.
Thank you.
So just for the audience, the whispering program was a sort of game that we played, and we printed buttons where you could write the languages that you spoke, and you made yourself by putting on one of these buttons, you made yourself available to be a translator for any talk.
An interpreter.
An interpreter by whispering in the back of the room while the talk was going on. So we did that a couple of times. We also tried to translate live on Twitter. That was very difficult, very fun though. But we realized also that we had the best technology in front of our hands to do this properly, which we're going to try in Sydney this year, which is to use a Google Doc or a Pirate Pad, like a simultaneous document that people can type quietly as the talks in any language. Can translate, several people can contribute to translate at the same time in the document, which also kills the birds with one stone, because that way you also have a document of the talk.
I really like these ideas.
And of course, the beautiful thing about translation is that everything that we do is translation. We're already trying to, when we're talking about technology, our audience already needs translation in many cases. So that even when we talk about technology amongst ourselves, many things are lost in translation. So it's always being in the frame of mind of the interpreter of the translation. I think it does, even if you're only talking in the same language, it's already just having that frame of mind. That is, full disclosure, I inherited the multilingual, multicultural committee with Mauricio Lana as the president and I'm the vice president. But we try to do things a little bit more formally to bear, not a complete anarchy.
Times change. But I must say, I also really like the idea you have put forward with the glossary in a way, and also that you've got different, you can have different proposals, and so you think much more about how you would say in your own language what it would mean, and actually it's a really good, it's not just an exercise, it's a very nice game, and it's a very intelligent things to do.
I did have a question. I did have a question. Also because you have, it's fantastic to see the history that my generation is now coming in and inheriting. This is the work that you guys have done. It's just amazing to see it all there. So now with GoDH and we're here, and the group is forming in South Asia, the Latin American community is coming together. We see movements everywhere now. Ray and Lynn just came back from South Africa. So now I feel like a new stage is coming, where these groups that formed with Europeans and Americans eventually with the Australians and the Japanese communities join. Now seems to be opening up to the rest of the world. I wanted to ask you, since you've been there for the trajectory, is how do you see this playing out when we're going to have now so many books? It's not 5 languages, and each of them coming with different cultures. And perhaps the Europeans, even though they multicultural and multilingual, they still understand themselves as Europeans in one way. But now we have these other cultures that may seem strange to the Europeans. How do you see the? I've seen it happen. Just to be fair.
To the European.
To the Europeans. It's always good to acknowledge that the differences are there. And they're actually to be celebrated, right? So this is, what do you see happening? How do you see this now, this new stage?
What should I say? I just think it's great. It also helps to, I was talking about Eurocentrism before when I was talking about all these old documents, because in these old days, let's call them old days, we only had the experience of this European association and the American association. And only later on the Canadians came. With the Canadians, things changed already a little bit, because they themselves came from a bilingual, officially bilingual country. And they behaved differently also. But also this whole discussion about multilingualism was very much Eurocentric, because Europe considers itself to be multilingual, and it is multilingual, European Union and all these sort of things. So it could be decentralized a bit, and that wouldn't harm at all. That's why I was thinking actually of changing the web pages and take out the European and just put in multilingualism, because it's not just Europe. So it changes our perspectives on things, and I think it's only enrichment on all sides what we are going towards or we are hoping for. Because
Do you see an intention between region and language? So now we have Humanistic, the French group is trying to form a group which is based on language.
I know there are problems.
Yes, so how do we negotiate that different parts of the world? You don't have an answer, okay? I don't either. I was kind of hoping you had the answer to this problem.
No, because it starts with Francophonie. It's a different matter, yeah. We Germans are happy. We don't have these sort of problems.
German.
No problems.
I'd like to ask a question exactly about that, because you just came here from Graz, right? Where they just had the German-speaking PH organization. And I'm curious from the perspective of a linguist who's used to describing linguistic situations, how is that playing itself out in a German-only speaking environment? I mean, how is the language that is being articulated or being found and being discovered and invented, right, on site? How fluid is it, or how would you describe the kind of German that's coming about in such an environment? I'm sorry to jump.
No, I'm just thinking where I should start really, because the first thing to say about that is that Austrian German, Swiss German, and Germany German is not the same. So there's already quite a lot of
Arabs are not the same.
and then there is also you do not use the sort of high the standard in the same sort of situation. So the situation itself is quite complex. There in the first conference, if I want to come back to this sort of language which is being created, in the first conference I thought there was a lot of anglicisms. Because so many terms have been used just in English all the time. I mean, as I said many times, I still don't know how you would call it in German, or how you, sometimes it's even the grammatical structure. I mean, the website, is it in the website, is it off the website, where is it, what do you, how do you say it? I thought that the second conference was less so, because probably in a year people have been writing about digital humanities and have been talking about digital humanities in our surroundings in German. So I think it's a process of development, and what will come up, I don't know. As long as we are able to talk about digital humanities in different varieties also, because on different levels. I don't want to talk about digital humanities only in a scientific language all the time. I want to also be able to have jokes about digital humanities, or saying, I don't know, stupid, nice things, all sorts of things. But it's, okay.
But I have a question which is closely related to it, which is when funding comes in, we have to deal with policymakers, which
And deans.
and I consider them to be part of the policymaking.
Politics.
But those people actually want to implement stuff quickly and get votes for it and yada yada. And at least the experience from within the European context is that as soon as you start marketing something in English, it's easier to get money for it with those who hold their hands on public money. And I guess the situation is somewhat similar in different contexts, but it's something we have to take into consideration. How do we kind of convince those that ought to be convinced in order to approve your Chima's proposal? How do you convince them to actually consider a non-English focused paper on something technical that doesn't sound as posh as English might sound to a German ear? Or like,
I think that's something we all have to battle for, fight for, and that's also one thing why it's good to have the associations, because the associations actually will need, and they are already doing that, talk to the funders and the stakeholders and all these sort of things, and they have to defend the interests of the digital humanities community in these different regions. And it's many things. It's also about evaluation criteria. It's about professional perspectives and so many things. I mean, there's loads. I mean, on the ATO level, these questions have been tackled in many ways already, but now it's down at the sort of more regional level, and you have to talk to different people. It's always good to have the ATO, because we all, I think that's a very good structure actually, because also the Association of Digital Humanities in German-speaking regions association is part of the European, and via the European, a member of ATO. So there is, that's quite a nice structure, sort of different levels of structure, organization, and also prestige, I think. And this prestige has to be used in a good way. It's a strange development altogether, I think. I mean, digital humanities started out on the international level. It didn't start out nationally. So before there were national digital humanities, there was the world national digital humanities, and it's being so-called localized somehow at the moment. It's very interesting to be watched, but with all these problems about Spanish could be the same sort of problem, couldn't it?
There are debates in the Spanish world where, because Spain belongs to the European Association, but Spain. Not to differentiate from New Spain. New Spain is the word for Mexico. Depends on you. Spain is associated with the European organization, but then of course they communicate a lot with the Spanish-speaking listservs and the groups, constant communication. And then there's this debate where the members of the Spanish Association, they belong to both groups, and they're trying to negotiate: do we create a journal here or here? Do we sign up here? So if there is going to be a Spanophone Latin American organization, this is going to present problems, or maybe not, maybe opportunities, right? It depends how you look at it. For the Spanish group in Spain. So and this is going to happen in many different parts of the world in different ways. Yeah.
I mean, discussions like this have been around before. I remember the discussion about the Real Academia Española, when they wanted to keep Spanish in their hands, but they have academias, what they call in English? Academies, in all different Spanish-speaking countries, and they still wanted to say, okay, this is the Spanish, this is the only good Spanish. So, I mean,
they're losing it. It's going to be interesting. In the next decade, we're going to see a battle for the letter H, which the Latin Americans want to get rid of. We'll see.
What are we fighting about?
I'm going to go for favor of keeping age. Actually, no, here's what I wanted to say. Elizabeth, we were talking about digital humanities. If you got in a room with this many people, that's an amazing thing to think of. It shows you what a room of bright, engaged people like us can do. That is great. The other thing is, I think too, it began because people were willing not to define things. They were willing to be open-minded. They were willing to be a community of practice, which by its nature is evolving, rather than prescriptive. So it's not a language academy saying, well, in Canada we're subject to these laws, which largely ensure that we are bilingual in certain ways. But we'd be more bilingual if we didn't have those laws. The reason DH has been able to be the thing it is because it's proceeded without those sorts of boundaries, proceeded without even ownership. And it's a marvelous thing that's evolved in the ways it has, to the point where we talk about the challenges of growth. That's a positive problem to have, I think.
Certainly.
Anyway, it's just an observation, and I still like age.
At home.
Last question.
Last
please.
question, sorry. I couldn't be here at the beginning, so I must have missed out on so many things. But my question is related to the governing structure of using languages. I mean, of course, definitely, as you were saying, you just encourage the use of multi-languages in any context. But is there any structure that governs that? Is there any kind of emerging theory that governs that? Or what kind of governing structure exists in such forums or in such practices? Where would English be maybe more helpful than Arabic, or where would Arabic be more helpful, or German? I mean, I'm just interested in whether or not there are certain criteria or structures that are emerging or that are in place that facilitate or maybe hinder this kind of process.
I mean, I'm not quite sure on which level. Mm-hmm. I mean, on the associational level, there are, on the ATO level, in the conferences, there are certain rules when it comes to conference papers, for example. They can be handed in, the proposals can be handed in 5 languages, I think. But this could change because, okay, it's first of all due to tradition, but it's also due to the amount of reviewers who can actually read other languages. Right. But there have been a lot of talks about enlarging the number of languages, depending on the growth of the number of reviewers. So it's quite feasible. Perhaps, I don't know how the discussion is going at the moment. I'm not so very much involved, but you can say perhaps something more. But I think it could be, or it looked as if it could be feasible that one day there could be proposals in Japanese, for example, if there were enough people who know how to review Japanese papers. So it's more governed by pragmatic criteria. Now that's the association. Okay, with the sort of localized associations, I had this morning already. Nice, it's very romantic now. Just
Computer lights.
Yeah. I can't see no.
You can use our phones to do something, huh?
Yeah,
Just keep going.
just keep going. The German conferences, obviously, we try to encourage or perhaps also prevent people from presenting in English. If they come from another country, that's different. But if they come from the German-speaking regions, they're supposed to present in German. So it's not completely exclusive, but there has to be a reason for somebody to present not in German. What else could there be?
I can tell you what are some of the others.
Just one thought, Brett. I mean, I think, for example, for things like the summer school or other things like that, I mean, I think the question is inclusive. Which language allows us to, in a certain context, and the context can change, which language allows us to communicate with most people. And I know, I said that with the summer school, I mean, there are people coming from so many different countries, and in some people come with very little English knowledge sometimes. But it's still the only language which at the moment is somehow known by more or less everybody. And then we can still talk with hands and feet and the rest we need. Yeah, communication is the important thing, I think.
Great, so I think we should thank Elisabeth for really for those of you.
Finish?
Yeah, well.